Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Now this video is going to be a bit different from the standard design videos I normally do. This one's going to be more about my opinion on the industry and how the profession is going. This one is going to be focused more on education and one, how you become a fully qualified architect, two, my opinions about this current system, and three, how I might change it to make it slightly better. So if you are thinking about going into architecture, or you're just interested in our profession, then stay tuned, get comfortable, and let's go through it. So to become a fully qualified architect, you have to go through a three-part education system. Part 1, undergrad, part 2, masters, and then part 3, which is a professional qualification that you gain during full-time education. But let's start at the beginning. Part 1. Part 1 is a 3 to 4 year undergrad course. Here you'll be introduced to the basics of architecture, drawing convention, architecture history and theory, principles behind design. You'll also get to explore skills such as sketching, physical model making, collaging, as well as 3D modeling on a computer, whether it be Revit or SketchUp or Rhino, that kind of thing, as well as your CAD drafting ability. Once you do that, you would have gained your undergrad qualification, and then you can go into work for your year-out placement. To be honest, at this point, you still don't know how to build a building. So here, when you do get a job, you'll generally be doing more visual work. So it may be presentations, you may help out with a design access statement, you may do 3D visuals, as well as some research for early stage concept design and early stage planning applications. The idea for this placement is that you need to be exposed to the professional side. You need to be exposed to the processes as to how to actually design a building. So you are really just there to soak up and hear what's going on and the different meetings that you might be attending. Generally, you'll be paired with a far more experienced architect, and they are meant to be there to support you as you're learning, because that's what you are doing, you are learning. Once you do that, or after that year, you then go back into masters. Now, masters, to be honest, is very similar to your final year of undergrad, maybe slightly more intense depending on where you go. I heard Bath University is a lot of fun. But here, it's not really more about doing the job. It's really more about your design ability and progressing that forward, maybe with a bit more emphasis on construction detailing. That's a 2-year degree. And once you gain that, congratulations, you are officially in full-time employment and with a new title of Architecture Assistant Part 2. Now, in this stage, you will be given far more responsibility than you were as a Part 1. So you may be tasked with managing the planning application of a small project or extension. You may help with managing the application of a far larger scheme with a more experienced architect. You will be introduced to design coordination, and you will give input into design team meetings as well as with clients and suppliers and all of that jazz. Here is the real nitty-gritty of the day-to-day life of an architect, and this is where you will start to learn that. Now, before moving on to your final part, a lot of architects tend to spend a couple years in this profession. I mean, being in education for so long, nobody's really itching to go back, but you generally only have to spend 1 year here. So by this point, you have 2 years of complete experience, and that makes you eligible to go and now do your part 3. Part 3 is a qualification you get more about the managerial side of architecture. You get this while you're in full-time employment. So you go to uni a few times a year, and then you're given coursework to do throughout the year. This is very much an evening and weekends kind of course, I'm not going to lie. In this course, you'll learn things about contract management, dealing with negotiating with clients. You will understand procurement methods and the different strategies as to how buildings are funded and who's responsible for the different aspects of them. You may even have to delve into, if something goes wrong, how do you manage that conflict? Who is liable? Who has to pay damages? The paying damages part is the part that the client and the contractor really want in detail. So this is where you learn those things, as well as how to manage a firm if you ever want to do that. This is a 1-year course. It may take a little longer. You can spread it out because at this point, people have different life commitments. So it's a bit more flexible than, full-time education. But once you do this, or once you submit all of your coursework, you do your final exam. Your final exam is just a body of qualified architects and tutors just to ensure that you know what you need to know to be a responsible and ethical architect. So they may ask you questions about your case study, which is a project that you have to write about in your part 3 that you've been doing in practice. And if different scenarios pop up, how would you handle them? What's the best practice? That kind of thing. Congratulations. Once you complete this, you are officially a qualified architect, and you can put that on your title. Now, this process takes a minimum of 7 years, but to be honest, most people do it in 10, 12 years, depending on their situation. Over the years, this has been seen as the gold standard of architecture education. RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architecture, ensures that this is the most comprehensive and robust method of becoming an architect. There's just one issue. All that years of full-time education doesn't teach you how to do the job. In undergrad and masters, you are generally taught on a theoretical framework. Now, the real-life limitations such as planning restrictions and building regulations, as well as cost is a big limitation. These things are mentioned, but you are under no obligation as a student to follow them when you are designing your projects, which is great because it allows students to have the freedom to come up with their style and design voice, as it were. The issue is that once you get into practice, these limitations will hit you, and they will hit hard. And because you aren't prepared for this during undergrad, all the solutions, the processes, and the methods of dealing with these limitations as they come up sound completely foreign to you. I didn't know what value engineering was until when I started my first Part 2 job, to be honest. Not to mention, and this is my biggest gripe with design education, coming up with a brief for your project is one of the biggest and most important part of your design studio, knowing what you're building. The issue is that when you get into practice, you find out the hard way that that's somebody else's job, which is a shame because architects are trained to study an environment and understand how to make it better. But when that's somebody else's job, all of that training seems quite redundant. We were always taught during education that don't worry about all the gaps in your knowledge or the fact that you don't know how to build a building. You'll learn all of that in practice. That is true. You will learn all of that in practice, and you will have to learn everything. But when they say that your employer has an obligation to teach you, they don't. The reality is that when you do get your job or when you do get hired, architecture is a difficult business. So your employer is only going to hire somebody if they need help, and that person needs to be able to help them. One of the biggest complaints with current employers now within architecture is that the newcomers don't know how to draw plans correctly or don't know about detailing, let alone coordination and how to read structural MVP drawings and all the other nitty-gritty about the general day-to-day process of how to be an architect. These things aren't reinforced enough during education, and that's a shame because it feels like after all that studying, you then have to learn everything all over again. You may find a mentor, somebody who is assigned to you to help you progress and learn in your career, but ultimately you will be held to professional standards and you will be expected to be able to produce work that can be billed out to clients, because that's how architects make money. And it's difficult if you don't know how to do that. Yes, architecture school was fun despite the endless hours in studio and the far less than healthy all-nighters, as well as the copious amounts of energy drinks you would have to consume to get through it all. It was fun, and most architects will say that they had a good time during school. But again, all of that is redundant if you don't know how the process or the reality of being an architect really is. For many years, RIBA has defended this educational process, saying that if they reduce the entry to becoming a qualified architect, it will then reduce the quality of new architects coming up. Again, they've held this position for a while. It's only until recent, after many years of debate, that their position is starting to change. I find this position redundant because if new architects are leaving school and not knowing what the profession is like or what to expect, then what was it all for? When discussing this with older professionals, people further along in their career, the general consensus is this is a rite of passage. This is what we all did. Back in my day, I stayed in the studio until 12 o'clock. I was in the office for 15 hours a day. You kids have it easy. But what they don't tell you is back in their day, a lot of stuff was done by hand. So that's why it took so long. Text editing or just rewriting dimensions was common practice. When it came to construction detailing, it was more for design intent as opposed to product specificity. There was far less revisions, and BIM wasn't a thing. Now, everything has to be drawn, everything has to be documented, regardless of the fact that we have so many more tools that was meant to make our job easier. We now have to do more work because people don't want to get sued. So everything has to be drawn, as opposed to trusting the construction team and the contractor and their years of experience to do more problem solving on the job. Currently, I question whether it is economically viable to become an architect today. We can talk pay later, go on a whole rant about that one. But it is difficult, considering how long it takes to get qualified. And to be honest, if one more person tells me it's not about the money, it's about the passion, I'm gonna lose it. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think architecture is incredibly important. I still think it's one of those skills that is generally there to make your environment a better place. And without architects, cities would suck, man. If engineers designed everything, it would be concrete blocks or steel and glass cubes everywhere. That's what architects are for. We like things to be pretty, But if we do want architects to succeed and succeed a bit earlier so they can, progress their lives, I would make a few changes. Firstly, architecture is very complicated, so I'm still not opposed to a university degree. You need an environment, teach them the basics, so I think that's fine. What I will say is that it needs to lean more to the practical nature of the job. If we're going to call it a vocational subject, then that's what it needs to be. You need to teach them how to do the job. So, by the end of that undergrad, a student or a recently graduated student should be able to manage a simple planning application by themselves, whether it be a small house or an extension, or if they're working on a larger scheme, they should understand the processes that come with that under the supervision of a qualified architect, for example. They should also be a more robust understanding of construction. We should be able to detail more accurately and more practically in relation to the projects that we're working on. Now, part 2. To be honest, part 2 or your master's course doesn't really teach you anything extra about the job. It's actually very similar to undergrad. So I would scrap this curriculum entirely, if I'm honest, and I would replace it with a 1-year full-time part 3 course. Now, to get into part 3, you need 2 years worth of experience. And I think that's a good idea because you need a general understanding of the processes of architecture and the different issues and things that can come up. I do think some years of experience is required. But at the same time, currently we do part 3 while you're in full-time employment, and you have to manage your time between working full-time and producing all of this work. And no part of architecture is easy, so this is very much evenings and weekends deal. And if you talk to any part 3 student, they didn't have a good time doing it. So that will reduce your stress from having to manage those 2 things, as well as allow students to qualify much earlier. And I think that's only good for anyone's progression. Now, in terms of the reduced amount of work experience you have by the time you do your part 3, assuming that you do it as quick as possible, you really only lose 1 year. And I don't think that's detrimental. The reality is that all the things that you do learn in part 3 are still theoretical in practice, because you now know how to manage a contract or negotiate with the client, but you may not have done so yet. So that's something that you'll still have to do at work. And chances are that there will be somebody more experienced to help you when that time comes. Long story short, I think architecture education can be much shorter. I think it can be more concise and more accurate to what the job actually entails. And then people have a genuine reality as to what they're expecting. But hey, that's just my 2 cents. If you like this video, if you think what I said made any kind of sense, like, subscribe. My next video, I'll be talking about the business side of architecture and really how architects make money. That's a whole different rabbit hole. But until then, take it easy. See ya.